Hey guys, this is Supernaut from the Rusty Cage. I'll be going through my list of top 5 albums from 2013. And I want to start off by saying that I'm not the type of guy to be on the bleeding edge of new music. I generally prefer to find hidden gems that were forgotten many years ago than to wait for a new album to come out. And in fact, when I was making this list the first time, most of the things that I came up with from 2012 because I was that far behind. But I made it through. And I also want to say that I'm kind of taking off my metal DJ cap right now because 3 out of 5 of my albums that I'm listing are actually instrumental ones. So with that being said, let's move on. Moving on to number 5, we have Like Clockwork by Queens of the Stone Age. This was released on Matador Records back in June. And for those of you guys that know me, I'm a huge Josh Homme fanboy, from everything to Caius to the Desert Sessions, things of that nature. And Queens of the Stone Age are some of the more poppy and rock kind of stuff that Josh Homme has done, or more radio-friendly material, really. But he still does manage to turn that into some interesting sounds, and that really applies for this record as well. The story behind the record is that Josh had some kind of routine knee surgery and ended up going wrong, and he spent something like 4 months bedridden, and that got him really down and depressed, and this is the album that came out of that. And you could really tell in the lyrical themes and in the music where that manifested itself. This album is a lot more rock and roll and eclectic than some of the other albums that he's done, especially some of the earlier Queens of the Stone Age albums, which are more lo-fi and more metal-oriented. But this one does manage to go in an interesting direction with songs like My God Is the Sun, which it does sound like a very much Queens of the Stone Age track, but it's very driving, it's upbeat, but it's also heavy. And that's opposed to songs like Keep Your Eyes Peeled, which is the album opener track. This one's really slow and heavy and ominous, and it's a sign of the things to come in the album. I played that song on my show a couple times, and for that exact reason. This album, as far as Queens of the Stone Age albums go, it's good enough that I'm almost ready to forgive them for inviting so many people to their show at One Eye Jack's in New Orleans that one time that they wouldn't honor the WTUL station tickets that I had. Almost. Alright, coming up next we have number 4. We have the self-titled album from Ensemble Pearl. And if this doesn't sound familiar to you, this is the project of Stephen O'Malley from Sun fame and members of Boris and Ghost. This is released on Drag City Records, and it's not really something that I was expecting. You might know Stephen O'Malley is a huge drone experimental guy, and what you're picturing when you're picturing anything from Boris or from Sun is something really distorted and doomy, but that's not what you're getting from this particular record. What you're getting is drone, but a lot more clean sounds and synth sounds, and with some bizarre surf rock influences that end up sneaking in there. There's a lot of spring reverb, and a lot of the synth noises conjure up images of the sea. So it does have a very meditative vibe to it. I think I listened to this whole album something like 24 times while I was studying and doing homework, and that not to say that the album is boring, but of course you won't like it if you don't like minimalist music to start with. But that's the type of vibe it conjures. It brings you to reflect and contemplate things. It's not a rocking record, and it's something you'd really have to listen to understand. Alright, my favorite track from this album would have to be the one called Giant. What this track does is it has a very simple and repeating melody to it, and it kind of gets a little more intense over time. You don't really notice it, but it feels kind of like you're falling or flying, you're not really sure which, and it slowly escalates and gets more intense. And that's the kind of thing that Stephen O'Malley and the rest of the band are best known for. They're best known for the types of soundscapes and atmospheres that they create. Number 3, we have the self-titled debut album from Bosnian Rainbows. And if this project doesn't sound familiar to you, it's the collaboration between the Mars Volta's Omar Rodriguez Lopez and Terry Genderbender from Les Butcherettes. This was released on Sargent House Records back in June. I was really waiting for this album to come out because I had heard the 2 singles, Torn Maps and Turtleneck, which I listened to those 2 tracks I don't even know how many times because they're just so damn catchy. Which is not something you normally attribute to an Omar Rodriguez Lopez project. Omar tends to have a lot of proggy and experimental, crazy energy that comes off of whatever he makes. But I guess that's why it's different in that regard, because it's not completely an Omar Rodriguez Lopez project. He is actually taking input and direction from other musicians, so it's more like a traditional band where everybody participates in the writing process. And I actually like this record more than a lot of the Mars Volta records. It's fresh, it's new, it does get a little poppy, but it's still very interesting. And it sort of reminds me of the first Mars Volta record, Deloused in the Comatorium, where you have Omar, who wrote a lot of it, but his creative force was kind of tempered and reined in by producer Rick Rubin, who was given some creative control there as well. So I think anything from Omar that's tempered with someone else's creative energies is going to be a lot better than something he puts out all on his own. Number 2 is Pelican's Forever Becoming. This was released back in October on Southern Lord Records. This record is the first one that Pelican has released since losing founding guitarist Laurent Schroeder-Lebec. He decided to leave the band, his heart wasn't in it, and he wanted to spend more time with his family. So they were joined by guitarist Dallas Thomas, who filled that particular void. And I was initially skeptical of how the band would turn out without him, but at a show back in November, they came to the Spanish Moon here in Baton Rouge. All of my worries were dissolved. They put on a pretty great show, and they played most of the songs from the new album, if not all of them, and I really understood what they were going for. First of all, the new album is a lot darker than their previous releases, and it's more claustrophobic too. It's not to say that it's necessarily heavier, it's just that the particular production and the way the songs are written, they don't have, 12-minute epics on this album. It's shorter, more constrained, and it really does have more of an anxious feeling to it, which Trevor DeBraw, the other guitarist, said in an interview that he attributed that mood in the album to Laurent's leaving. So in that context, the album really makes sense. And for an instrumental band, they really don't have any filler in their material, which I think really sets them apart. So it's really difficult for me to pick 1 or 2 songs that characterize the album. I think the album needs to be best experienced as a whole for you to understand it. I wrote a review of this particular album back in October when the album came out on the KLSU website, so you guys should check that out. And in the coveted number 1 spot, we have Russian Circles with Memorial. This was released by Sargent House Records back in October, and this was actually recorded in the same studio at the same time as the Pelican record I was just discussing. That was this summer. It was in Electrical Audio Studios, and I actually had a tough time deciding which one deserved the number 1 spot. But what really won me over is the textural variety and the dynamic range that you see on the Russian Circles album that really nudges it ahead of the Pelican album. Songs like Burial and Deficit, those are the heaviest ones in the album. They're also my favorite songs in the album because I think Russian Circles is at its best, at their heaviest. The heavier parts hit me a little harder, and then the softer parts in the album are a little bit more washed out and delicate than what you would find on the Pelican record. So that's why I chose this one for the #1 spot. Once again, this one is darker than their previous releases, and we've seen sort of this progression from their earlier albums, from this post-rock band to more of a post-metal sound. And I think, like I said, they're doing their best when they're doing more post-metal, heavier material with more distortion, which really sets them apart from contemporaries like This Will Destroy You or Explosions in the Sky. So you can really tell that Russian Circles has a very specific sound, and that sound is kind of minimalistic, but building up something that's really big sounding from something that's small. So you'll hear guitarist Mike Sullivan loop some really simple phrase and put a couple things on top of it. You have distorted bass and you have some droning guitar lines, and pretty soon you have a huge wall of sound. And that's really what they've become known for. And the end of this record does have a little interesting tidbit. It's a collaboration between Chelsea Wolfe and Russian Circles on the song Memorial. It's the title track, where she does provide vocals there. And if I remember correctly, I don't think Russian Circles have ever had vocals on any of their songs. So this shows that they're willing to experiment with their sound, and I'm really looking forward to new releases from Russian Circles from this point forward. Alright guys, thanks for watching. This has been another Top 5 Albums video, and stay tuned for more on this channel. Subscribe to make sure you don't miss any.